Everybody, welcome to Yerushalmi Chagigah Daf Zayin. We're at the very top of the Mishnah of Zayin. Just before we start, again, it's a little bit complex. This sugya deals with Tum and Taira and different levels. I'll try to keep it brief, um, just for the sake of simplicity. So there's something called medris tuma. Medris tuma is like a masa. In other words, let's say a zav sits down on a kli, and we're talking about a kli. We don't say amoy v'nas malachtenu. Like let's say he sits down on a chair, as opposed to sitting down on let's say a bucket that's being used for something else, and they say, "Hey, get up! Don't sit on it." Let's say that a zav sits down on a chair. That chair becomes tame. That's tumas medris. It's masa carrying a load. There's also hesed. Hesed is moving something. The zav moves something. The zav is the most chamer of the tumas. I was excluding a mace. And we're going to address the different levels of people who we said, if you remember, we said this is that people who are tahor for something, have to be in a state of they have to be in a state of constant awareness for what they're tahor for, and we'll see that in a minute. So big day Amoretz, the begadim of Amoretz are medris leprushim. They have the din, the begadim, and we'll see. The Gemara will discuss why we're focusing on begadim as opposed to just the Amoritz, is Medris Leprushim. So the big Amoritz is a Medris Leprushim. He has a din, his begodim have a din of Tumas Medris, which spreads Tuma, to a parish. It's somebody who is makpid to eat his chulin be tahara. Big day Prushim Medris Loich Truma. Someone who's a parish, his clothing has a din of medris, and they'll spread Tuma to people who are in tahar for eating truma. That's another level up. Big derech truma medris lekodesh, and it goes up again. So if you eat truma, your begadim have a din of tumas medris for somebody who eats kodesh. Yosef ben Yezer Yachassid Shebekahuna. He was an unbelievable tzaddik. Obviously, he was a kohen. V'hoisem et pachte medris lekodesh. Stam on a regular basis, a kohen gets to eat truma. Kodesh he only gets to eat in the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, it's considered to be a higher level. And his even Yosef ben Yezer's clothing had a din of tumas medris for somebody who is tar for kodesh. Yochanan good gida. Vayochel ataras hakodesh kol yamav. He used to eat all his chulin ataras hakodesh. He pretended he was so machmid that he pretended that the chulin he was eating was true was kodesh. Vahois mitpachta medris lechatas, and his mitpachas, his handkerchief, was had a din of tumas medris for the afer for the paraduma, and that's the highest level of kedusha. Fine. Rabbi Yosef B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan ben Maggoi Shano. What's the tone? We're talking about medris over here. What are we choishish for over here exactly? So with choishish, and again, there's multiple pshatim over here. I try to keep it as simple as possible. So I went for the most simple pshat. There may be problems with the pshat that I'm saying. It's either based off the Karban sometimes the Pnei Moshe, the Reb Chaim Kanievsky. There's multiple pshat, like I said over here. So again, we're just going to go straight with what I think is most straightforward pshat. The chashash over here isn't that the Amoritz himself, the Zav, touched it. And the reason for that is because Zivas is unusual. The Chacham, when they were guys, were only guys on things that are normal. And Zivas is not normal. Zivas is something out of the ordinary. And therefore, it's not the Amoritz himself. We're talking about Goyishon, talking about his wife. We're worried that his wife, when she was tum and nida, which is a lot more common, right? Especially today, you have plenty of tumas nida, right? There's all hilchas nida. That's still negated today. But even in those days, nida is something that's common. So therefore, Choshesh Dam Oritz's wife, who's not so makbid maybe on what she touches, what she does, she may have touched the clothing of her husband, the Amoritz, and now this Parish touches it. So he is Mikabel Tuma from the clothing of the Amoritz. That's B'Magoy Shano. And what we're saying is that's not just a din of touching. Usually touching something doesn't render it the highest state of Tuma. it takes it down a level, right? Risha makes a sheni, etc. But over here, the Chumra Geyser, that the clothing has a din of a medris. Now, Rab Zeriboy come Rab Yoso meichon nit ma beged azeh medris. How did it become medris? So Amar Alei tipat shoyse ishto shalam aretz yesheves olav aruma. So what he adds over here is, part of it we explained. So his wife touches it. Now, what we're saying is his wife not only touched it, she sat on it when she was naked. So it was direct contact. Now, normally in Nida, there's what Mary likes to say, the princess and the pea, that you have. You don't have to, the zav or the nida does not have to come in direct contact with the item that's supporting them. So, like I said, the princess and the pea could have 10 mattresses piled up. The zav is sitting, or the nida is sitting at the very top one. All 10 mattresses underneath it are tame because they're supporting the nida or the zav or the zava. So normally it doesn't to be mitame medris, and that will be medris because it's supporting the zav. So now the mattress has a din of tame medris. That's even if the mattress doesn't touch the one. We said 10 mattresses down. It didn't touch the nida, but it's the mattress becomes tame medris anyway. Over here, the chacham were geyser that dafka we suspect that not only did she touch it, but let's say she was wearing her clothing and she touched it, it would not have the din of medris tuma. It has a din of medris tuma if she touched it naked, so she sat on it while naked. Okay. Shmuel bar Abba boy kumer b'zeiro kamo datam tamon ein heset bechulin v'yesh heset bechulin aidei maga. So what we have over here is normally by chulin there's no Thomas Hesed by chulin. Now it's moving something around that's chulin has no effect on the chulin. But over here we say through maga, through touching it directly. In other words, with like we said over here with the ishta, the nida, right? She touches it. So the maga so a masa b'chulin also. V'yesh masa b'chulin day maga through touching it. Nothing to do with Donald Trump. Maga is touching. So through touching it directly and moving it around, that will cause the tumas hasid, and that's what we're discussing over here. Now, the chashash over here, like we said, is that ishta nida will have she will have sat on it while naked, so she's touching it directly. Yeah, the carbonated kind of learns is it's a, like an it comes at the same thing, but he learns it more like a question. In other words, so boy kom Rav Ziri k'mod atom tamon in hes b'chulun yesheset b'chulun aydei maga, and we say yeah, u'tekavasa a masa b'chulun normally v'yesh masa b'chulun aydei maga through touching it directly. That's the gzera, that's the chumra that the chachamim put on on these various levels of truma that one is considered tamei to the next level up. Mishmul achoy Rav Shaya Rabbi Yirmiyah boy Yashval Akisei V'Noga boy. Now again, there's questions how to learn this. I'll just learn this with the carbon Ada. What happens if she sat on a chair and she touched it? So Gemara says, I don't know what kind of question is that. Manushach, in Masa, Hare Masa. Masa and Hesed are interchangeable. So she sat on it, so it's Tameh. And if and Maga, Hare Maga, she touched it. So in Manushach, it's Tameh. What's the question? No. So Gemara says, Gemara dat ma, B'Masa Chi Nase Rubai. So after that the chair bears the weight of most of the, in other words, if let's say she went and rested her palm on the chair, it doesn't become Tameh. You have to have most of her, knows most of her weight. She's on it, she's using it as a chair, she's sitting down on it, Anida. So Achi Nasaruba. The Kavasoba Maga is it also Achi Iga Beruba? Is it until you touch most of it? In other words, just touching a little bit, taking a finger, touching a chair, will that make it tummy or not? That was the Gemara's question, and no answer was given. Okay. Gufei shel parish maushi yosik is zav eitzel truma. Now, I noticed in the Mishnah we said big day prushim is medris loichle truma. What about the guf of the parish? who is very nice. He's a very ehrlich person, but he's only showing himself for chulin. He doesn't focus on truma. So does his body itself become have a din of a zav if he touches truma? So it's like a zav went and touched truma, or is it only his clothing? So hey, Siv Rabbi Yochanan, v'atani v'lo tamaniach ha'maretz b'teich beis. So if you have a case where a guy leaves Namaritz in his house. He himself is a parish, but he leaves Namaritz in his house to Lashamre to watch his house. Couldn't come, I guess, couldn't find another security guard. Bisman Shurayis and Ichnas say Yoitzin or Eichlam Amashkim V'Kli Cheres Psuchin Tmei. If he can see, the owner can see what's going on. He sees who comes in, who goes out, so he knows who's going in and he knows who's coming and going and who to be choshish for. So in that case, oichlin, mashkin, and open jugs, or open klicheres jugs, those are all tummy because we're choshish that the Amoritz touched them. Aval mishkavos, v'amoshavos, sitting down chairs or beds or klicheres mukaf and psil, or sealed klicheres, tahirin, those remain tahir. Now, zok the Gemara in tema asu gufay kizov, eitzalat truma. If you're going to tell me that he has a din of a zav, eitzel truma, and we think right now we're talking about truma, afil makafin tzam psil you tamaim, because if he's maset on, even if it's a sealed earthenware clothing, it's still makabel tumas heset, tumas maganat, but tumas heset, yes. So what do we see from over here? Obviously, his guf is not right. We see the guf of the Amoritz is not metama the kalim. Certainly, the guf of the parish is not going to be metama truma either. Amri Babazi, no, tipata, no proof from over here. Tipata b'Amoritz eitzel parish v'les shma mino klum. We're talking about the Amoritz eitzel the parish, in other words, and the parish is chulin. We're not talking about truma. So therefore, it's not Mekabel Truma. It's only done by Truma. By Truma, if he's maced on a sealed earthenware keli that has Truma, so there, fine. It's going to be Metamet. But not by Chulin. Chulin doesn't have this din and so therefore you have no raya whether or not there's no answer to the question of whether or not the guf of the parish is considered to be medris legabe oichle truma. Amar Rabbi Kena Rabbi Yossi Rabbi. This is what my Rabbi Yossi said. Kol ma danan kaiman hochav truma nan geben. No. You're wrong. We're not talking about chulin. All the cases that we mentioned here are talking about truma. And Teluchoshu, I'll prove it to you. Tanin time we learned over there, afilu muvel, afilu kafus hakol tame. Even if this ama oretz was muvel, he's missing his limbs. He can't get around unless somebody else schleps him around. Or let's say he's tied up and he can't get around. Still hakol tame. Klum amru tameim loy mishum hesed. How can it be tame? It can only be tame alt hesed. So what do we see from over here? So we see from over here that apparently that he can be metame. That he is metamet tumas hesed. So we see from over here that even a parish would have a din of hesed legabe truma, and he would metamet. Loy kena Rabbi Yochanan loy chaytzetzos v'loy seitos v'loy rishus yachid v'loy rishus amoritz eitzel truma. Now, what we're saying over here is Rabbi Yochanan said that kalim of an amoritz are not chaytzitz b'fnei tama because choshish they're tame. If they themselves are tame, they can't prevent tama. Because again, amoritz is not makbid on tama. Below is seitos, and this is our proof. There's also no Thomas Hesed either. In other words, even if his clothing is medus for truma, he's not metama behesed. And lo rishus yachid is if it's a samvik tumas truma, rishus yachid it is a din of tahira, and a rishus amoretz is if you have truma that's sitting in the shusa ametz, ain't a tameya imifkida. So if you gave an amoritz truma to guard, you can take it back and not suspect that it became tummy. Now, again, this is according to the carbonated shot. Now you said lo yaseitos, even by an amoritz, right, that there's no din of Tumas Hesed. So Kol came by a parish, there's no din of Tumas Hesed. And there you go. So the answer is no. The answer is that the guf of the parish is not mitama the truma. Doesn't have a din of Tumas Medris legabe truma. So it must be again. So when we go back, what was the gzeir over here? It must be our Mishnah is like we said earlier. It must be our Mishnah. The reason was saying that big day Amaretz and big day Prushim is because we're gufa geyser on the begadim dafka, not the body of the person. The reason I said is because that's something that's usual. There's no that neither his wife being a neither is normal. As him being a zav is not normal. The chavim geyser only where it's normal. Again, there are multiple pshatim over here. I'll just emphasize this because there's so many different things, and I'm aware there are questions on certain things that I'm saying, but again, I try to cut to the most simple pshat. Fine. Now the Gemara is another question. What about Gufish Kodesh? Maushi Yasa Kizov Eitzel right? Same way we had the previous question was a Parish Legavi Truma. What about a Kodesh Shiasa Kizov Eitzel Chatas again over here referring to the Paradun, it's the highest level of Kedusha. So Nishmina Ado, let's see if we can prove it. Shnei Legin, we have two jugs. Echad Torah Kodesh, ve'echad Torah Lechatas. One is Torah Kodesh, so it's a lower level. One is Torah Lechatas. Shnogu b'zeh v'zeh, they touched each other. Shnei and Tahor. So you see over here, obviously, is no Trumas Hesed. Oh, I skipped. I apologize. I skipped over here. Gufa shel truma. I'm sorry. Go back up. I apologize. Gufa shel truma. Ma'ashi yasik kizovitz ala kodesh. So now, what about somebody who's showing for truma? Is he the new zavit al kodesh? Let's see if we can prove from over here. Hachodesh shofer shel kodesh. Someone who cuts a reed to be used as a tube to hold kodesh food or some kind of kodesh. Hachoitcha v'amatbila. Now we're thinking that these are two separate people. The one who cut off the reed and the one who goes to toivel the reed. Ton tefillah. They both require tefillah. Now again, this requires some explanation. I'll try to keep it brief. So the din is that somebody who, if you're handling kalim of Kodesh, before they're inaugurated to Kodesh, you have to toivel them. Why do you have to toivel them? Because we're choshish that before they were actually Kodesh, somebody who is not as guarded as maybe you should be, let's say he was having a conversation, the workman who was fashioning the kli is having a conversation, and in the course of the conversation, some saliva comes out of his mouth and touches this kli that you're making kodesh. In our case, this shoiferes. That shoiferes just became tamei because it's a shoiferes using for kodesh, and somebody in a less madrega just spit onto it, and that person maybe is not tahar kodesh, and therefore he was metamit. And now that kli becomes tahor. Now when you touch it, you become tamei. So what happens is the guy who cuts off this reed, now he has this kli. He just became tummy from the kli, and the kli itself became tummy. Again, all these are chashashas. We don't know this for a fact, but therefore the chomer goes at tefillah. Okay, so nicha chaytcha. Sigmar says okay. Nicha makes sense to say chaytcha got cut it because he touched it. There's no way to get around that. He had to touch it, so therefore he made it tummy. So you say, all right, that's because he touched it and therefore became tummy and go and toivel it. Fine. Madbila, but the guy who goes to toivel it, why does he have to go to the mikveh? Right? Why is he metamet? Why doesn't he wear a glove or wrap the reed in a couple of handkerchiefs and toivel it like that? And this way it doesn't come into contact with it. Right? So it must be over here. It must be over here that what? That we see Tumas Medrash. Like we said, Tumas Medrash doesn't require direct contact. So you see from over here that someone who's Gufa Shal Truma has a din of Zav Eitel Kodesh. He's Metama Medrash, because otherwise right, he didn't have to touch the Shveferis, and yet it's still Tame. So Gemara says no. So Gemara says Elatifate b'shechatcha menas latbila. we're talking about the same guy. He cut it and he was toivel it. So now when he cut it, like we said, he had to have touched it. So that's the case, then all bets are off. We have no raya. Could be that you're not a zav. There's no Thomas Tuma Medrash over here. The only time is when he touched it, when he cut it, and he's the same guy who's toivel it. Fine. So we don't really have an answer either way of what the din is of Gufa Shatruma. Does he have din of a Zavitz El Kodesh? What about the next case? Gufa Shakodesh Mashi Yosek Zavitz El Chatos. Nashminado, Shnei Legina, like we explained before, Echot Le Torah Le Kodesh, Echot Le Truma, Shnog Zebezeh. I'm sorry, not Echot Torah Le Chatos, Shnog Zebezeh, Shneim Tohirim. So it must be over here that it does not have a din of Hesed, and therefore we see that the same thing would apply for the Gufa Shel Kodesh does not have a din of a Zav Eitzel Chatas. So this is 1 second, but must need to pliga. We have a brayse that argues. It says Atar lechatos shehisit biroikai uveshich zor shel tar l'trum. Let's say the guy who he's the top level of tahira. He's tar even for chatos, and he moves around spit from. No, he doesn't touch it, but he moves around spit or semen from somebody who's tar l'truma. Nitma, he becomes tame. So you see from here that it does that a even though the tar lechatas didn't come in direct contact with this with the saliva, still the truma the tar truma with his spit managed to be metamim. So again, so we see the opposite. We see that yes, he does have a din of zav eitzel um, of echatas. Okay, now. The Gemara says he tar truma, he tar kodesh. So it's obviously between the two brass you see, one of them was tar it's tar kodesh, right? That touched the tar lechatos, and the second one had a case of tar letruma that touched the chatos. You would say, well, maybe there's a difference. Maybe tar truma he's on the lowest level, so maybe he's on even lower level than the tar kodesh. So maybe that's why it's metama the and that's why it's metama, the guy was tar lechatas. So the Gemara says, no, 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 no. Anytime he tar lechum, he tar lechatas, it's the same din. Anytime you have a guy on a lower level, he will be metama, the guy on the higher level. So we see from over here, 1 second. Yep. At least from the second brace, you see over here that he would be mitama that we were guys at Tumas Zivas on somebody who's tar kodesh on some to someone who is tar on a high level to chatas. Hadroch perik and doshin, hadroch perik and doshin, hadroch perik and doshin, bli neder. We'll start the new perik tomorrow.